Hello, BookTube. Welcome to another Middlemarch meditation. I don't have a scripted preamble for today's episode. It's a sad little scene, and I felt I should just let it speak for itself. Today we're on chapter 20, and we get to spend some time with Dorothea Casaubon, alone. Let's start reading. A child forsaken, waking suddenly, whose gaze afeard on all things round doth rove, and seeth only that it cannot see the meeting eyes of love. 2 hours later, Dorothea was seated in an inner room or boudoir of a handsome apartment in the Via Sistina. I am sorry to add that she was sobbing bitterly with such abandonment to this relief of an oppressed heart as a woman habitually controlled by pride on her own account and thoughtfulness for others will sometimes allow herself when she feels securely alone. And Mr. Casaubon was certain to remain away for some time at the Vatican. Yet Dorothea had no distinctly shapen grievance that she could state even to herself, and in the midst of her confused thought and passion, the mental act that was struggling forth into clearness was a self-accusing cry that her feeling of desolation was the fault of her own spiritual poverty. She had married the man of her choice, and with the advantage over most girls that she had contemplated her marriage chiefly as the beginning of new duties. From the very first she had thought of Mr. Casaubon as having a mind so much above her own that he must often be claimed by studies which she could not entirely share. Moreover, after the brief, narrow experience of her girlhood, she was beholding Rome, the city of visible history, where the past of a whole hemisphere seems moving in funeral procession with strange ancestral images and trophies gathered from afar. But this stupendous fragmentariness heightened the dreamlike strangeness of her bridal life. Dorothea had now been 5 weeks in Rome, and in the kindly mornings, when autumn and winter seemed to go hand in hand like a happy aged couple, one of whom would presently survive in chillier loneliness, she had driven about at first with Mr. Casaubon, but of late chiefly with Tantripp and their experienced courier. She had been led through the best galleries, had been taken to the chief points of view, had been shown the greatest ruins and the most glorious churches, and she had ended by oftenest choosing to drive out to the Campagna, where she could feel alone with the earth and sky, away from the oppressive masquerade of ages in which her own life, too, seemed to become a mask with enigmatical costumes. To those who have looked at Rome with the quickening power of a knowledge which breathes a growing soul into all historical shapes, and traces out the suppressed transitions which unite all contrasts, Rome may still be the spiritual center and interpreter of the world. But let them conceive one more historical contrast: the gigantic, broken revelations of that imperial and papal city, thrust abruptly on the notions of a girl who had been brought up in English and Swiss Puritanism, fed on meagre Protestant histories, and on art chiefly of the hand-screen sort. A girl whose ardent nature turned all her small allowance of knowledge into principles, fusing her actions into their mold, and whose quick emotions gave the most abstract things the quality of a pleasure or a pain. A girl who had lately become a wife, and from the enthusiastic acceptance of untried duty, found herself plunged in tumultuous preoccupation with her personal lot. The weight of unintelligible Rome might lie easily on bright nymphs to whom it formed a background for the brilliant picnic of Anglo-foreign society. But Dorothea had no such defence against deep impressions. Ruins and basilicas, palaces and colossi, set in the midst of a sordid present where all that was living and warm-blooded seemed sunk in the deep degeneracy of a superstition divorced from reverence. The dimmer but yet eager Titanic life gazing and struggling on walls and ceilings, the long vistas of white forms whose marble eyes seemed to hold the monotonous light of an alien world, all this vast wreck of ambitious ideals, sensuous and spiritual, mixed confusedly with the signs of breathing forgetfulness and degradation, at first jarred her as with an electric shock, and then urged themselves on her with that ache belonging to a glut of confused ideas which check the flow of emotion. Forms both pale and glowing took possession of her young sense and fixed themselves in her memory even when she was not thinking of them, preparing strange associations which remained through her after years. Our moods are apt to bring with them images which succeed each other like the magic lantern patterns of a doze, and in certain states of dull forlornness, Dorothea all her life continued to see the vastness of St. Peter's, the huge bronze canopy, the excited intention in the attitudes and garments of the prophets and evangelists in the mosaics above, and the red drapery which was being hung for Christmas, spreading itself everywhere like a disease of the retina. Not that this inward amazement of Dorothea's was anything very exceptional. Many souls in their young nudity are tumbled out among incongruities and left to find their feet among them while their elders go about their business. Nor can I suppose that when Mrs. Casaubon is discovered in a fit of weeping 6 weeks after her wedding, the situation will be regarded as tragic. Some discouragement, some faintness of heart at the new, real future which replaces the imaginary is not unusual, and we do not expect people to be deeply moved by that which is not unusual. That element of tragedy which lies in the very fact of frequency has not yet wrought itself into the coarse emotion of mankind, and perhaps our frames could hardly bear much of it. If we had keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heart beat, and we should die of that roar which lies on the other side of silence. As it is, the quickest of us walk about well wadded with stupidity. However, Dorothea was crying, and if she had been required to state the cause, she could only have done so in some such general words as I have already used. To have been driven to be more particular would have been like trying to give a history of the lights and shadows, for that new, real future which was replacing the imaginary drew its material from the endless minutiae by which her view of Mr. Casaubon and her wifely relation, now that she was married to him, was gradually changing with the secret motion of a watch hand from what it had been in her maiden dream. It was too early yet for her fully to recognize or at least admit the change, still more for her to have readjusted that devotedness which was so necessary a part of her mental life that she was almost sure sooner or later to recover it. Permanent rebellion, the disorder of a life without some loving, reverent resolve, was not possible to her. But she was now in an interval when the very force of her nature heightened its confusion. In this way, the early months of marriage often are times of critical tumult, whether that of a shrimp pool or of deeper waters, which afterwards subsides into cheerful peace. But was not Mr. Casaubon just as learned as before? Had his forms of expression changed, or his sentiments become less laudable? O waywardness of womanhood! Did his chronology fail him, or did his ability to state not only a theory, but the names of those who held it, or his provision for giving the heads of any subject on demand? And was not Rome the place in all the world to give free play to such accomplishments? Besides, had not Dorothea's enthusiasm especially dwelt on the prospect of relieving the weight, and perhaps the sadness with which great tasks lie on him who has to achieve them? And that such weight pressed on Mr. Casaubon was only plainer than before. All these are crushing questions, but whatever else remained the same, the light had changed, and you cannot find the pearly dawn at noonday. The fact is unalterable that a fellow mortal with whose nature you are acquainted solely through brief entrances and exits of a few imaginative weeks of cold courtship may, when seen in the continuity of married companionship, be disclosed as something better or worse than what you have preconceived, but will certainly not appear altogether the same, and it would be astonishing to find how soon the change is felt if we had no kindred changes to compare with it. To share lodgings with a brilliant dinner companion, or to see a favourite politician in the ministry, may bring about changes quite as rapid. In these cases, too, we begin by knowing little and believing much, and we sometimes end by inverting the quantities. Still, such comparisons might mislead, for no man was more incapable of flashy make-believe than Mr. Casaubon. He was as genuine a character as any ruminant animal, and he had not actively assisted in creating any illusions about himself. How was it that in the weeks since her marriage, Dorothea had not distinctly observed, but felt, with a stifling depression, that the large vistas and wide fresh air which she had dreamed of finding in her husband's mind were replaced by anterooms and winding passages which seemed to lead nowhither? I suppose it was that in courtship everything is regarded as provisional and preliminary, and the smallest sample of virtue or accomplishment is taken to guarantee delightful stores which the broad leisure of marriage will reveal. But the doorsill of marriage once crossed, expectation is concentrated on the present. Having once embarked on your marital voyage, it is impossible not to be aware that you make no way, and that the sea is not within sight, that in fact you are exploring an enclosed basin. This chapter reminds me in a small way of the one we read about Dr. Lidgett, when he was tormenting himself about what decision he was going to make when it came time, if it came time, to vote for who would be hospital chaplain. You know, we spent a lot of time inside his head, going back and forth, and this feels similar, although this chapter brought me personally closer to Dorothea Brooke Casaubon. I'm going to take a while to call her by her married name, aren't I? It made her seem as young as she actually is. Previously, when she was in a familiar surrounding, she seemed so much older, so much more of a grown woman. In chapters 1 through 10, that's the person that I got. I wondered why she didn't see things, but I don't think I gave her credit for being a girl, for being very, very young. And now I finally see she is showing her real calendar age. And so the epigraph here becomes telling. It really feels like it's talking about Dorothea because it's speaking of a child. So the chapter is emphasizing how young and inexperienced Dorothea is, how little she knows about the world. It uses the word forsaken, doesn't it? So it's emphasizing how alien her surroundings are. Rome, she doesn't know what to make of Rome. It almost takes her mind apart because it's like nothing she was ever told could exist. And then it uses the word waking, doesn't it, the epigraph? So the chapter suggests the beginnings of a new and disturbing vision of what is real, what her life really is. And finally, there's this word suddenly in the epigraph, doesn't it? And this chapter is showing just how deep the shock is of all this strangeness, how powerful and confusing all these visions are. And I bet that we can all think of times, either ourselves as children or other children that we know, that when a child is suddenly upset or frightened, what do they want? Well, they immediately want the comfort and the closeness of someone they know loves them. And that's true of Dorothea as well. And I think what we're finding out is that she cannot ask this kind of comfort, closeness, and sense of love from her husband. And she's otherwise alone in this amazingly confusing and frightening place, like a little child waking up from a horrible dream and they don't know what to make of it. And there's no one that she can turn to relieve all her fear and shock. If we now proceed through the text, the first thing that caught my eye was that Dorothea is staying at a very handsome apartment on the Via Sistina. Now, the Via Sistina, back in Dorothea's time, would have been a different piece of space than the Via Sistina is now. I'm going to put on screen two maps, one after another. The first one is a map, circa 1830, and you can see that the Via Sistina was just a small section of a street up near the Spanish Steps, which is a beautiful landmark. If I can, I'll try and insert a picture of it somewhere into this reading, because it's just too beautiful not to put in. That small section now is filled with a lot of luxury hotels. So one of those could have been the same building, assuming that it remained standing through the bombardment of the Second World War. That might be the only question mark over the buildings today. But if you were to do a street view of the Via Sistina, that same small section today, you would see a lot of beautiful hotels. They do look like older architecture, so some of them, I think, might well have been the place Eliot had in mind when she was thinking of this handsome apartment. There's some very, very handsome hotel rooms in that section of the Via Sistina. But today, the Via Sistina is longer. So if you were to look at a map now, you would suddenly see that streets that used to have a different name in 1830 have taken over the name Via Sistina. It's a much longer place now. Now, there is a hotel on the Via Sistina, and its uppermost floors, it goes up to a fourth story. So it's taller than the other buildings on the Via Sistina. And if you get one of the upper floor rooms, which of course are luxury suites that you have to pay something like £7,000 per night. So, I don't even think we'd be allowed to cross the threshold and look in. I might be allowed to clean the place if I got properly trained. That might be about it. But from those rooms, from the terraces on those high rooms, the view is amazing because it looks out over the River Tiber and towards the Vatican, so you can see the entire Vatican and the hills beyond it. It's beautiful views. I understand why you could offer such high prices for the rooms that overlook that. It's a view that you'd only ever get once in a lifetime, if that. And this place is very convenient. Of course, Dorothea would have traveled everywhere by a horse-drawn coach. Nevertheless, that would not have been a long trip, even by coach, to the Vatican and back. So they're very conveniently located for the studies Mr. Casaubon wants to do. They're also, though, located in just the most beautiful part of the city, beautiful for walking around as well. And it's clear that Dorothea is being given so much opportunity to see as much of the city as she wants to. And it's a pity that she wasn't better educated, and then what she sees might mean more to her. But of course, as the chapter's been describing, it's all just so confusing for her. And I love when the narrator says, when she feels securely alone. That is, that Dorothea would never allow herself this kind of unbridled, childlike display of emotion unless she knew she was safe, that no one was going to walk in on her. And of course, that is betraying the fact that Mr. Casaubon is away and that she has no worry that he's going to come back and find her in this state. And then there's this quote, which made me sad too. No distinctly shapen grievance that she could state, even to herself. So if you were to ask her what's wrong, she just doesn't, she can't even grasp it yet. I felt so sad for her. But I think what was awful was that she falls back on her religious training, which I'm familiar with from my own past. That spiritual training, which always says that if you are upset, you're probably the problem. If you're upset, it's about you. It's your spiritual poverty. You need to look into yourself and make some kind of change. Heaven only knows what, if you've already made loads of changes before and you're still miserable. But that's how that thinking tends to work. And why does she think that she must be the problem too? Because look at all the advantages she has. She is a woman who married a man she chose. Not many women got to be so lucky. Even wealthier young women in families where a particular marriage was, the father was counting on it for financial reasons, you sometimes didn't get your choice. You sometimes felt obligated to do, or we think about Jane Austen's Persuasion. You could want to marry a man and your family says, no, that's not sufficient. They're just not good enough, and we're not going to bless the marriage. So you either have to cut off your ties from all of us and possibly some financial help, which you will need because that's why we think this person is unsuitable, or you do what we say and you wait until you meet a man or we introduce you to a man who's more suitable. But Dorothea doesn't have to worry. She's been able to choose this man, to refuse a man that everyone thought she really ought to marry and choose a different one. And everyone is going along with her wishes. So she has more power than many women of her age would have had. And then on top of it, where is she? She's been taken to Rome. She's staying in beautiful accommodation. I don't know how expensive it would have been in 1830. I can only take the properties as they are today and what people are paying for them as an indication of how exclusive those same apartments might well have been in the 1830s. So she's staying in a beautiful place. The beauties of Rome, they're footsteps away. She does not need to go far. But of course, she has a maid to take care of everything for her. She has an expensive, experienced courier. He knows the city like the back of his hand. There's nothing he doesn't know about. So she has everything and lots of free time. Mr. Casaubon is not dictating what they will spend their time doing. No, the courier is Dorothea's to command. So she is completely free. I don't know, there are times when we can look at her circumstances and go, I don't know how much better this could get. I've never been to Rome. But if I went, there's no way I could stay in a situation similar to Dorothea's. I'm very jealous. I would love to have the material things she has. I could do without the marriage though. And of course, I think that is the root of the problem here, because after the honeymoon, after Rome is gone and all these beautiful things and all the luxury, she will be back in Middlemarch at Lowick Parish with just Mr. Casaubon. And I think she's beginning to realize how horrific that's going to be. Of course, if we're talking about Rome, I should mention, some of you will know this, that George Eliot and George Henry Lewes visited Rome in 1860. And George Eliot, I should call her Marian Evans, but you know who I mean, kept extensive journals of her time in the city. And of course, these would have provided a lot of material that she could draw from when it came time to write Middlemarch. I'm going to read from Rosemary Ashton's biography, just a little passage about their visit to Rome and just some of Marian's impressions of the city at the time. Marian wrote lengthy Recollections of Italy, 1860, in her journal, describing the places, people, and paintings she saw. She may have anticipated that she might draw on her impressions in future novels, as in the event she did, and then she goes on to mention Middlemarch. She also took the opportunity to note the paradox that seeing a place one has heard about and looked forward to visiting is bound to involve some anxiety and disappointment, even when, as she found with Venice, the reality actually meets or even exceeds expectation. And then I'm going to skip forward here to a quote that she said when she found herself contemplating the cities of Italy that she'd looked forward to seeing for years. She said, "One great deduction to me from the delight of seeing world-famous objects is the frequent double consciousness, which tells me that I am not enjoying the actual vision enough, and that when higher enjoyment comes with the reproduction of the scene in my imagination, I shall have lost some of the details which impress me too feebly in the present, because the faculties are not wrought up into energetic action." Rome, where they stayed for most of April, disappointed them at first with its ugly modern streets, and Marian anticipated the rest of her stay with some dejection at the probable relations of our Rome visited was to bear to our Rome unvisited. They had arrived just in time for Holy Week and found the ceremonies wearisome and empty, as Dorothea Casaubon was also to do. Interestingly, the heathen Lewes was more affronted by papal Rome, very odious, built on shams, he wrote on 18th of April, his 43rd birthday. Marian even knelt to be blessed by the Pope, remembering, as she told Maria Congreve, what Pius VII said to the soldier, that he would never be the worse for the blessing of an old man. Still, she too found the Holy Week ceremonies a melancholy, hollow business, and was not conscious of improvement from the Pope's blessing, as she added, dryly. Ancient Rome thrilled them more than Catholic Rome, and so also did the small English corner, for of course they visited the graves of Shelley and Keats in the Protestant cemetery, and it goes on. But it was clear that she had a strange, do you call it a double-mindedness? A mind sort of not sure what it wants to think. And that made me think about Dorothea as well, because Dorothea's not sure how she should respond. She's having emotional responses to these things, but they're not connected to any knowledge. And so she doesn't really know what to do with them. So I got the feeling that unsettledness that Eliot felt, she had kind of found a way to distill into Dorothea Brooke. Dorothea Casaubon. I am going to forget to call Dorothea by her married name. This shows just what I feel about the marriage, doesn't it? And Dorothea, to relieve herself of this strange, unsettling, almost overwhelming state of mind, often tells her courier to drive her out into the Campagna, into the countryside, out away from the city, where she just enjoys the simple things, the earth, the air, and it's almost like it's like when someone is overstimulated. If you're not neurotypical, you often need to get away from busy, noisy, highly stimulating environments and get something a bit more peaceful. And getting away into the countryside is often one of those things. And it just seems like she's in that same state of mind of needing a way to take down the level of stimulation. And this overstimulation is because her world, the world that she's grown up in, is actually very, very small and very simple. And she's not prepared for anything more complex. What does the book speak of? The notions of a girl. That's really all she has in her Swiss English Protestant education, which was very narrow. It didn't trouble itself too much to introduce her to art, because art is problematic for puritanical Protestantism. And I don't even think I need to explain why. Can you think why? When we look at the statue of Ariadne with one breast exposed, I wonder why. I wonder what Puritanism might have had as objections to most art. Yeah. So, but you can think her world was so small and so limited, and Rome just cracks that open and says, oh, you know nothing. You know nothing of the world. The world has been going on for centuries, and you know so little about it. That would, I don't know how that would disorient me. I think, where do I even begin to make sense of that? And I would have to go, I think, to the countryside too. I would understand the country. Dorothea understands the countryside, right? Cows, sheep grazing, enclosures, farmhouses, perhaps a barn, or seeing somebody picking vegetables, or whatever, just simple things that she would recognize and go, okay, this I have seen, this I have experienced, this I'm familiar with. Rome, everything I look at just tells me I know nothing. It is as if I am occupying a different planet. She talks about it being alien, an alien world, those marble statues with their eyes, just like she's on some other planet, if you will. There's a passage too that I should explain, because Rosemary Ashton hinted at it in what she quoted from Eliot's journal. There is a part of Rome that is not anglicized, but in the 1830s, it was frequented. There was a little English corner where you could go and be amongst other people who spoke English. You can imagine, no, I can. The English are very funny like that, because we rarely learn another European language. So we always huddle together in little cliques because we feel safe We know we can speak to people there. And obviously that was still true in the 1830s, even though cultured people would have been proud to know at least one other language, but that was usually French. It wasn't often Italian, it was more often French. Anyway, if Dorothea had been more like, let's say, Celia, whose knowledge of the world, or whose ability to, I suppose, take in things was a little bit more shallow, a little bit more surfacey, I think Celia might have enjoyed the sights of Rome a little bit more, or at least she would have enjoyed all that lovely society that was getting together in the English corner. She probably would have gone to more events. She probably would have been invited to things because Mr. Casaubon would have had enough importance, and where they were staying on the Via Sistina, it would have been clear to those around them staying in the same apartments that they were well-to-do, and so they probably would have been invited to things. And I think Celia probably would have had a better Rome honeymoon than poor Dorothea, who, of course, is all active brain wanting to take things in. And, of course, Rome has too many things to put in a brain, and she doesn't know how to deal with that, except by fleeing the city every once in a while for a bit of relief. I don't know if you remember that quote from chapter 19, where Eliot's narrator says that the world in general, she means England, was more ignorant of good and evil by at least 40 years. I wonder if what she meant was there was a large part of the population in England that really they only had a Middlemarch level of understanding the world, a Middlemarch Protestant understanding of the world. In other words, it's not just Dorothea that's finding Rome overwhelming. If you pulled any Middlemarcher out and stuck them in Rome, I don't think they'd know what to do with all that came at them either. They'd either ignore it, they'd either wad up with more stupidity, or in Dorothea's case, when she is highly sensitive, you're just left with it. And I was thinking, it's not actually a bad definition, if you like, of Victorian England, because the 19th century was one, if you think about the beginning of the 19th century when England was still mainly agricultural, to the end of the 19th century, when cities had changed out of all recognition. Manchester, for example, which was a much smaller urban area at the beginning of the 19th century, would have been completely unrecognizable. If you skipped forward in time as a time traveler from, let's say, 1795 to 1895 in Manchester, I don't know I think there would have been an overwhelm. It would have been a different kind of overwhelm than you would get in Rome because the changes would all be industrial and mainly dirty. I don't think you would you'd see some lovely buildings. So, okay, there would have been some things to glory about, but I think mainly you would have just seen the blackness of all that created by all that industry. But think about all that change. Think about how all that change must have affected people's minds, like Dorothea, where you feel all jangly and overstimulated and frightened, like a child waking from a scary dream. Do you think, I throw this out to everybody just because it's come into my head, do you think this is why the Gothic became so popular for Victorians as a type of fiction, a style of fiction? Because didn't it perhaps seem a little bit Gothic? That is, you thought you knew it and then you didn't, or you thought everything was comfortable and nice and safe, and then out of nowhere comes something you don't know how to deal with, something frightening. The whole 19th century must have felt like that. And of course, as Britain went out expanding their empire, that meant that there were other peoples that you had to encounter. And of course, no one got any accurate information about those peoples. And anyway, everyone thought it was unnecessary to gather any information about those peoples because we lived in that bubble which said, well, the English are better. So that's the end of that. We don't need to think anymore. But of course, it still creates a mental, almost fissure, like a fault line where pressure builds up because, there's truth there that needs to come out. You can only deny it for so long, and then the pressure overwhelms. So I do wonder if for Victorians, that was why the Gothic, I'm particularly thinking of Wuthering Heights at the moment, because that is a book about what happens when something from the outside world comes into your safe little place and disturbs it and upends it. How many ways can it unsettle and change the way things have always been? because I think that in the 19th century was the disturbing thing. Or if you want to take Jane Eyre as an example, Jane Eyre is a story of, a young woman thinks she knows how things are, thinks people are what they seem to be on the surface. But of course, as she meets Mr. Rochester and she begins to live in his house, and she begins to think, what's going on? Something I don't understand is going on. And of course, that's a fault line where pressure is building up and eventually the truth must break through. And so these kind of stories seem to happen again and again in the 19th century as if they typify what for many 19th century adults must have been this confusion of you think you know the world, and then it breaks apart and is no longer recognizable to you in some kind of conceptual way. But I am digressing. We should go on to page 194, where there's that incredible quote where Eliot is talking about the neurotypical without knowing the term. I'm going to reread it because it was that good. She says, if we had a keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heartbeat. And then she goes on to say, as it is, the quickest of us walk about well wadded with stupidity. And I don't think the narrator means that as an insult. I mean, not entirely. What they're saying is that in general, no one thinks very much of a new bride crying because she just realized that what she thought married life would be like is not what it's actually like. They say, oh, lots of brides do that. That's pretty typical. And so because it's typical, telling people that much, you're not really telling them anything. But then the narrator, of course, goes on to say, oh, it's a pity that we don't react to it just because it's typical. It's a pity that we don't think, isn't the fact that kind of sadness is typical, shouldn't we worry about that? Shouldn't we maybe change something? And that's then when she comes in with this quote and says, well, maybe the truth is we're all just mostly too insensitive to things. There are things that we aren't aware of, and maybe that's for our good. Maybe that protects us. And then she goes on to give the quote that I just read. If we had that keen vision, it would be like hearing the grass grow. It'd be like just too much if we could really sense everything, every little thing that was going on. So she says, well, then even the best of us are a bit wadded with stupidity. That is, our perception of the outside world it's almost desensitized for our safety. And that should give us some sympathy, I think, with neurodiversity, where sometimes that sensory input is heightened and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't wad up with anything. That the best you can do is change the environment to take the level of stimulation down so you get a bit of a break. My favorite page, though, in this whole section that we've been reading is 195. And the top of 196, of course, because we kind of skipped into one paragraph there. But it's, you can see the narrator going, okay, we have to figure this out. Dorothea doesn't know what's wrong, but we'll have to sit and figure out what exactly is wrong. And they start by saying, was not Mr. Casaubon just as learned? They try to think, what has changed in Mr. Casaubon that could be the real problem here? But of course, they can't find anything. They say he's exactly the same. There's no logic in looking to Mr. Casaubon to see if something has changed from before marriage to after marriage that you could pinpoint is there. There's one of the causes right there. So the narrator then, having laid all this out, they have to go, right, what has changed then? And they come to one thing. They say the light has changed. What do they mean by that? I suppose they mean the viewpoint has shifted in some way. Light that was once on something else or had a different quality, so you didn't quite see every detail. Light has now changed, and there are details that are visible that perhaps weren't before. And so the narrator's talking about other life experiences that are similar, where you think you see something, you think you've seen a person, but you haven't really. And they talk about, what happens when you know a very witty dinner guest, and then you get to stay with them for a holiday, so you get a little bit of a longer stay. Or you see a politician, heaven forbid, have to spend a long time in private with a politician, because then, yes, she says, all these presentations that we make to others to make ourselves look good, they fall away and we see more of the real person. This is always a disappointment. So she's saying, well, is that the case? But then the narrator has to go, no, you know what? That's not a helpful argument either in this case, because there is nobody more incapable of flashy make-believe. There is no one who would make a worse politician than Mr. Casaubon, because he would always just be who he is. He wouldn't put on a facade for the sake of the cameras. Not that there were any cameras in those days, but you get my drift. So the narrator's sort of scratching their head in front of all of us, going, well, okay, it can't be Mr. Casaubon, because he's not capable of being a man who presents one way, and then when you get to know him better, you go, oh, hang on, there's more to this guy than he ever made public. No, he always made himself quite public. So the narrator can only come to this final conclusion, and that is, they say, in courtship, everything is regarded as provisional or preliminary. And I'm going to read my notes a bit more because I don't want to miss out any of the points that I was thinking of. So the narrator says, maybe it's like this. When you first date someone, you treat every aspect of themselves that they reveal to you as like a sampler, just a little bit of what might be coming. So if they give some money to charity, maybe you multiply that out and you think, oh, they're a great philanthropist, this person. Or if they read a book, you think, oh, intellectual. Or if they take a lot of time over their appearance, maybe you think, a bit shallow, perhaps. Whereas in reality, what you might be seeing is all you get. That you might not be dating a philanthropist, but you just might be dating somebody who once in a blue moon puts some loose change in a collection box, or maybe they even had a reason why they gave to that particular charity that doesn't apply to other charities. Or the person who reads a book, they're not an intellect, but now and again they read a book. It's just like, one of those things that happens, like eating lobster. Once in a while you might do it, but do you do it every day? No. Maybe you find out that they just read the same book over and over. And nothing else, absolutely nothing else. And maybe they took a lot of time over their appearance because they were a little nervous about meeting you. But the truth is, they don't really like that amount of fuss normally. So our narrator is building up this same argument with relation to Mr. Casaubon. Yes, he gave Dorothea little glimpses inside his mind, little tiny glimpses. And she assumed that what she was seeing was like the beginning of a great vista intellectually, that she was just like the first steps in a much larger journey. But those little glimpses that were actually hinting at a mental structure that was more like tiny little rooms, connected by, what does the narrator say, winding passages. So there's lots of bits of things stored here and there, and the connections between them might seem a bit, stretched. And I'm feeling pity for Dorothea, because her mind is so energetic. And it's like trying to ask a young horse to be content with just galloping up and down and up and down and up and down the same closed corridor of space. It's not fair. Dorothea is a person who needs space intellectually. Or you think of zoo animals, and I don't go to zoos very much because they do disturb me for this, when larger animals are in an enclosure that does not suit their natural behavior, and they're pacing it, going around and around and around the perimeter. And you know what they're trying to do? They're trying to come as close as they possibly can to the freedom to roam that would have been normal for them. And this is the best they can get. And I feel like, we've got a situation that's very similar here with Mrs. Casaubon. There we go. Remembered her name. When I think of constriction and restriction, I think, yes, now I can think of her married name. And that is Middlemarch meditation done. That's August out of the way. Now, September's Middlemarch meditation. I need to say this, everybody, because I will be away at the end of September, and I'd like to take a little break from YouTube because, holiday. Everybody should have a little holiday, and it won't be long. I'll be back with you at the beginning of October. Not a problem. But I think what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I'll just skip Middlemarch meditation for September, which is a big ask because I know it makes it just take me longer to get through the book. But I don't know. It's not like I'm in a hurry or ever had an end date that I wanted to make. I don't really have a deadline for this project. I'm doing it till it's done. So we will skip September and come back again at the end of October to pick up where we left off. So I'll give you lots of reminders. No worry about that. In the meantime, everybody, hope your September, which is starting tomorrow. No, yes, tomorrow. I could check a calendar. Starting tomorrow. Hope it starts well for you reading-wise and carries on well. And I'll see you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.